and that you had an amazing evening so far. All right, so we are going to start with our grade 8 lesson, our grade 8 English lesson on adjectives and adverbs. All right, so before we start with our grade 8 English lesson on adjectives and adverbs, we're going to go to aplusstudents.ca, and then we're going to log in with our username as well as your password. Scroll down. Where is this? And then we to click on the subject of language arts. So once we've selected of language arts, we go to grade 8. All right. So in today's lesson, we said that we are doing adjectives and adverbs, right? So you're going to scroll down to the chapter of adjectives and adverbs. So you're going to scroll down all the way until you get to adjectives and adverbs. Then you're going to click on the chapter adjectives and adverbs. All right, so once we are in the chapter of adjectives and adverbs, we are going to focus on the lessons, or the doing today is choose between adjectives and adverbs, right? So before we choose between an adjective and adverb, we need to know what an adjective is as well as what an adverb is. And then also, is the word an adjective or an adverb? And we will only be able to know that once we know what an adjective is as well as what an adverb is. All right, so we're going to the first one. Choose between adjectives and adverbs. All right, so an adjective, right? We'll start with adjectives. An adjective is a word that describes or it modifies a noun or a pronoun, right? And adjectives, it often tells us what kind or it tells us how many. For example, the apples were delicious, right? So what kind of apples were they? They were delicious apples, right? So an adjective is a word that describes the noun, the pronoun, or we can say that it modifies the noun or the pronoun, right? That's an adjective. And adjectives, it often tells us what kind or it tells us how many. And we say that the apple were delicious, right? So which means that delicious, which is the adjective, it tells us what kind of apples they were, right? So delicious, which is the adjective, it tells us what kind of apples they were. They have an adverb, right? An adverb. And an adverb is a word that describes a verb or it modifies a verb, right? Or an adjective or another adverb, right? So an adjective is a word that describes or modifies a verb, an adjective, or another adverb, right? And adverbs, it often tells us how, when, where, to what extent, or to what degree, right? Those are adverbs. And if we look at an example of an adverb, right, it says Grace ran really quickly, right? So how did Grace run, right? She ran quickly. So quickly tells us how Grace ran, right? So the adverb is quickly and it tells us how Grace ran. So how. So we see adverbs, it often tells us how, when, where, to what extent, or to what degree, right? Most of verbs, right, it tells us or most of the adverbs that tells us how it ends in ny, in ly. For example, like quickly, right? So quick tells us how Grace ran, and it ends in ly, right? So most of the adverbs, it tells us how it ends in ly, right? And we need an example of quickly. However, you can't always use ly to tell whether a word is an adjective or an adverb, right? Because adverbs, it differs, right? Right? Because it doesn't mean that if the adjective ends or the word ends in ly, that it is an adverb, because you can also find an adjective that ends in y, and then you'll find an adverb that does not end in ly. For example, she arrives soon, right? So soon, it tells us when she will arrive, right? So soon tells us when, right? And remember, adverbs, it often tells us how, which ends in ly. It tells us when he or she will arrive, where, which also mentions either the place, to what extent, or to what degree, right? So soon in the sentence of she arrives soon, right? Soon, it is an adverb and it does not end in ly, right? So I even mentioned that yes, even though we have adverbs that ends in ly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is only an adverb that ends in ly. We can also have adjectives that ends in ly. And an example is Fred has a friendly dog, right? So what kind of dog does Fred have? Fred have a friendly dog. And friendly, it ends in ly, right? And this tells us what kind of dog Fred has, right? Friendly. So it means that we have words, we can either have an adverb or we can have an adjective that ends in ly, but that is when we will have to distinguish um, what is being identified. Are we identifying the adverb, or are we talking about an adverb, right? Which one is being modified or described? Is it the verb or is it the noun, right? All right. Because remember, an adjective is a word that describes or modifies a noun or pronoun, and it often tells us what kind and how many. And an adverb is a word that describes or modifies a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. And adverbs often tell us when, how, where, to what extent, or to what degree, right? So those are the differences between an adjective as well as an adverb, right? Right. So now we're going on to our, we're going to do a sentence, right? And it says we need to choose the word that best describes or modifies the verb. Mr. and Mrs. Wells purchased a cottage on Lake Michigan. So we need to choose year. We need to choose between recent or recently in order to choose the best word to describe or modify the verb. So Mr. and Mrs. Wells, is it recent purchased a cottage on Lake Michigan, or they recently purchased a cottage on Lake Michigan? We need to choose the correct one. All right, so if we look at the difference, right? If we difference, then recent, it shows basically or it identifies more of the adjective, right? And in this case, recently is our adverb, right? That describes or modifies our verb, which is purchased. So recently is our correct verb or adverb, sorry. Yes, so yes, it's the word purchased is a verb. So it must be described or modified by an adverb. So recently is an adverb and recent is an adjective, like I mentioned earlier on. All right. Um, Julie's gorgeous. So Julie's gorgeous beaded gown was, we need to choose between, was entire, oopsie, write it over here, was entire or entirely handmade by her niece. We need to choose the correct word that best describes or modifies the verb, right? The verb, which means that we need to choose the verb that describes or modifies the verb. So choose the word that best describes or modifies the verb. Is it entire? Entirely. So Julie's gorgeous beaded gown was entire handmade by her niece or entirely handmade by her niece. So if we were to use the adverb, right, or the word that describes or modifies the verb, then we will say entirely, right? And entirely is, it's an adverb, right? Whereas entire is an adjective. Entire is an adjective, whereas entire is an adverb. We're going to the next one. Mayor, Mayor Hurst, we need to choose the correct word. Is it ready? Oops. Let me write it over here. Is it ready or readily? We need to choose between those two words, right? So Mayor Hurst signed off on the committee's plan to fund the construction of a new bridge, right? So is it Mayor Hurst ready signed off on the committee's plan to fund the construction of a new bridge, or he readily signed off on the committee's plan to fund the construction of a new bridge? And in this case, we need to choose the word best describes or modifies the verb, which is, of course, the adverb that we need to choose between these two words, which means that we need which word is an adverb and which word is an adjective. All right, so in this case, ready is the adjective and readily is the adverb that describes or modifies the verb. So which means that Mayor Hurst readily signed off on the committee's plan to fund the construction of the new bridge. And we said ready is an adjective, readily is the adverb. Josh and Denise sell their handmade crafts at bazaars around the county, right? So we actually need to choose a adverb, right? And in this case, they are saying sometimes. So when? Sometimes. Sometimes Josh and Denise sell their handmade crafts at bazaars around the county. And this is an adverb that tells us when, right? Remember we said that adverbs, it often tells us how, where, when, to what extent, and to what degree. Oh, we already did this one. So Mrs. Burton recently purchased a cottage on Lake Michigan. And we said the adverb within the sentence is recently. Because recently is the adverb, and we said the adjective is recent. So recently is the adverb and recent is the adjective. All right, so now we're going to do a test on choosing between adjectives and adverbs. All right, so Mr. and Mrs. Burton recently purchased a cottage on Lake Michigan, or recent purchased a cottage on Lake. We need to choose the correct word that best describes or modifies the verb, which means that we need to choose the adverb between these two words so that we can complete the sentence. So Mr. and Mrs. Burton recently or recent purchased a cottage on Lake Michigan. All right, so if we were to choose between the two words, right, then we will choose recently, because recently is an adverb that best describes or modifies the verb, right? Because purchase is the verb and recently is the adverb. Recent is the adjective. Alana thought for a moment and then she responded, is it intelligently, to Mrs. Khan's question, or she responded intelligent to Mrs. Khan's question. We need to choose between intelligently or intelligent. Remember, intelligent, it means that you are intelligent. Intelligently depends on a response or how people describe you to be. So Elena thought for a moment and then she responded. We will then say respond intelligently, because it describes the word responded, which is a verb. Mayor Hurst is already signed off on the committee's plan to fund the construction of a new bridge. We need to choose between ready or readily. And we need to choose the word that best describes or modifies the verb. Ready, signed off, or readily signed off on the committee's plan to fund the construction of a new bridge. We need to choose between those two words. All right, so if we choose between those two words, right, then we can then say ready is an adjective, right? And remember, an adjective describes and modifies a noun, so that is not correct. So we will go with readily, because readily, So ready, right? So in this case, right, Mayor has ready signed off on the committee's plan to fund construction of a new bridge, right? So whenever you have a whenever you have something like this, right, where you maybe chose an incorrect word, right? So it's not necessarily you don't know the answer, right, or it's incorrect, but it's just that our test is made up to an extent that the questions or the responses or the answers are tricky, right? So in this case, whenever you get something incorrect, then you can go back, or you can maybe find the correct answer, right? And then once you find the correct answer, you can copy the link, send it to us, and then we will basically give you 100 bonus points, right? So if you do get an answer incorrect, because our answers can be very tricky on the test, right? So if you get an incorrect, you can then go and find the correct answer, copy the link, send it to us, and we will give you 100 bonus points. Thank you. All right. So now we're going back and to the next one, right? So the next one says, is the word an adjective or an adverb, right? So we now need to choose between, is the word an adjective or is the word an adverb? And we said an adjective is a word that describes or modifies a noun or a pronoun. An adjective often tells us what kind, or it tells us how many, right? And an adverb is a word that describes or modifies a verb, an adjective, or it describes or modifies another adverb, right? And verbs, it often tells us how, when, where, to what extent, or to what degree. Also, most adjectives, not adjectives, adverbs, right? It ends in ly. So most adverbs that tells us how ends in ly, right? However, you will find some that does not end in ly, right? And also there's sometimes a difference between if a word is an adjective and if a word is an adverb, because some adjectives also end in ly. For example, the friendly dog. So friendly tells us what kind of a dog, right? It is a friendly dog, but we need to know what is being described, what is being modified. So if your noun is being described or modified, then it is an adjective. But if the verb, adjective, or another adverb is being described or modified, and then we know it is an adverb. All right. All right, so now let's look at the sentence, right? It says, is the word in bold an adjective or an adverb? So we need to choose if the word in bold is an adjective or an adverb. Our neighborhood group raised enough money to turn that barren park into an attractive, welcoming place for families to gather. So barren describes the park. So what kind of park? It is a barren park. So our neighborhood group raised enough money to turn that park into an attractive, welcoming place for families together. So barren is the adjective or an adverb. So barren describes or modifies the noun. So we can say is an adjective, right? Because it tells us the park, right? What kind of park, right? It is a barren park, right? And the park be a noun. All right, so the ideal candidate for president is knowledgeable about both foreign affairs and domestic issues. The ideal candidate for president is knowledgeable about both foreign affairs and domestic issues. We need to say if that is the word ideal, the ideal candidate, right? If it is an adjective or an adverb. It describes or it modifies the word candidate. And the candidate meaning it is a noun, which is a person. So we will say that it is an adjective. It tells us about the candidate, the person. We're going to say that it is an adjective. Oopsie. Adjective. Because it tells us about the type of or person that they are choosing. All right, so we are going on to the next one, right? Where are we? The Constitution of the United States divides federal into three branches so that no single branch can become too powerful. So is in bold, which is federal, is it an adjective or is it an adverb? The Constitution of the United States divides the federal government into three branches so that no single branch can become too powerful. Federal, is that an adjective or an adverb? What is it describing or modifying? The federal government, right? So they're making mention of the federal government, right? Which is a noun, right? So which means that federal is an adjective, right? That either describes or modifies a noun, which is government. Right? So federal describes or modifies the noun government. So it is an adjective. All right, we're going to next. We did the first one. My neighbor who is unusually tall is cautious around oopsie, around ceiling fans. So a fan that blows cool air. So my neighbor who is unusually tall is always cautious around ceiling fans. Unusually tall. All right, so guys, the word unusually is an adverb, right? Why is it an adverb? Because it describes the adjective which is tall, right? So it is describing the adjective tall. So remember we said an adverb, it describes or modify either a verb or an adverb or an adjective. In this case, tall is an adjective. So which means that unusually is an adverb because it describes or modifies the adjective. All right, we're going to the next one. Did you notice how Kendra's writing steadily improved after she signed up for that writer's workshop? Did you notice how Kendra's writing steadily improved after she signed up for that writer's workshop? Steadily improved. We need to choose the correct word to in bold, whether it is an adjective or it is an adverb, right? So the word steadily. So is that an adjective or is it an adverb? All right, so how steadily. So it means that this is an adverb, right? And it is modifying or describing either a verb or adverb. It's not an adjective. All right. And we're going next. We already did that one. The choir from Danville performed brilliantly during the final round of the regional competition. So the choir from Danville performed brilliantly during the final round of regional competition. We need to choose the correct word. The choir from Danville performed brilliantly, right? We are basically describing or explaining how they performed. They performed brilliantly. So if they performed brilliantly, they can say that it is an adverb because an adverb describes or modifies adjective or another adverb, right? And that is a verb, which is performed is a verb. And we already did that one. All right, so before we go to the test, let us quickly go and do an activity. So we're not going to do all of the 8 in the one. All right, so we are going to circle, right? It says choose the right word, circle it in blue if it is an adjective and red if it is an adverb, right? So the first one is done for us, right? It is circled in blue, which indicates it is an adjective. So my poor family can't afford a new car. So poor being an adjective, right? Which describes the family. Jonathan performed is poor at his concert or poorly at his concert. So we need to either choose red or blue. So in this case, poorly describes how they performed. Peter is calm under pressure, or Peter is calmly under pressure. Is he calm under pressure or calmly under pressure? So we will then just say that P is calm. Describes how Peter is when he is under pressure. Mom calm or calmly removed the boiling pot from the stove. Right? Remove, right? Removed is a word that is either being described or modified. So removed, so which means that we can say, you're gonna choose red, and we're gonna say mom calmly removed the boiling pot from the stove. The teacher spoke firm or firmly to the students. The teacher spoke firm or firmly to the students, right? Tells us how the teacher spoke. So she spoke. We can say firmly. Dad has to be firm with my older brother, or dad has to be firmly with my older brother, right? So this describes how dad needs to be, so which means that he needs to be firm, which is an adjective. And then Mika quietly walked to the kitchen, and then the quiet children listened, right? So those are either adjectives or adverbs that we had identified within that sentences. All right, we're going on to the next one. We're only going to do about 2 sentences. We need to choose between the word or from the words within the word bank or within the box, right? And to fill it in by its correct missing spaces. So Andy's, we either need to choose between busy, greatly, adorable, active, small, happily, lovely, lazy, noisy, big, or eagerly. Cat. We are describing the cat. All right, so if we were to describe the cat, maybe we can say Andy's adorable cat, cute cat, right? Cat Lola had kittens. They were small little creatures because they were tiny and small little creatures that were starting to, is it busy, explore Andy's house, greatly, adorably, active, small, happily, lovely, lazily, noisily, big, or eagerly, right? So we need to describe how they just explored the place, right? So it's either greatly, happily, lovely, lazily, or noisily, depending, of course, how cats explore. All right, so we can either say they eagerly explored or we can say that they noisily explored. Let's just go with eagerly, right? All right, so we are only going to do those three, right? And those are a few adjectives and adverbs, right? All right, so let's go back to our test. If we go back to our tutorial, right, we're going to go to test, and now we're going to test ourselves on is the word an adjective or an adverb, especially on the lesson that we did earlier on, right? On is the word an adjective or adverb. We need to look, pardon, we that is in bold, and then we need to say if it is an adjective or if it's an adverb. My neighbor, who is unusually tall, is always cautious around ceiling fans. So, unusually, right? Is it an adjective or is it an adverb? What is it being described? What is it modifying? Unusually, right? So, it is either telling us about how tall the neighbor is. So, tall is being described or tied within the sentence. All right, so tall is an adjective, right? And if tall is an adjective, then it means that unusually is going to be an adverb because an adverb describes either a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. So if you have that, then well done. The bald eagle, the Liberty Bell, and the American are all considered patriotic symbols of the United States. We need to say if that word is either an adjective or if it is an adverb. Patriotic symbol. Patriotic symbol. All right, so if it's a patriotic symbol, let us maybe choose an adjective. So it is an adjective, right, which describes the symbol. Because if we had to say patriotically, it would have been an adverb, right? So at the conference, I heard an absolutely incredible speaker. So at the conference, I heard an absolutely incredible speaker give a talk about the history of aviation. So, absolutely, we need to say if absolutely is either an adjective or if it is an adverb, right? So, adjective meaning describes or modifies a noun, or an adverb where it describes or modifies a verb, adjective, or an adverb. So, at the conference, I heard an absolutely incredible speaker give a talk about the history of aviation. All right, let's choose adverb, right? So, absolutely tells us about the speaker or how he spoke. In everything she does, Jody demonstrates a genuine desire to help others. So, in everything she does, Jody demonstrates a genuine desire to help others. Is genuine an adjective or is genuine an adverb? We need to choose the correct one. In everything she does, Jody demonstrates genuine desires to help others. She is genuine. She's authentic, right? So is that an adjective or is that an adverb? The genuine can also mean real or it can mean sincere. All right, let's choose one, right? So we choose adjective, right? Because it describes the type of person that Jody is. I can't believe how many city council members were absent from today's vote. I can't believe how many city council members were absent from today's vote. Is absent an adjective or is absent an adverb, right? We need to choose the word that best describes. Are they describing a noun or are they describing an adjective, a verb, or another adverb? All right, let's choose one. All right, so we are going to choose adjective, right? And it shows that the people were absent, describes the noun. All right, so that is our lessons on choosing between adjectives and adverbs. And we also identified if the word an adjective or an adverb, right? So before we end our lesson on and adjectives and adverbs, we said an adjective, it is a word that describes or modifies a noun or pronoun. It often tells us what kind and how many. And then we have an adverb, and an adverb tells us about a verb, an adjective, or another adverb, right? And it often tells us how, when, where, to what extent, or to what degree, right? And we also said that most of our adjectives that tells us how it ends in ly, but of course not all of it. However, you will also find some of the some words that end in ly doesn't necessarily mean that it is an adverb, right? Because firstly, not all adverbs end in ly, And secondly, you can also find adjectives that ends in ly. For example, the friendly dog, right? That describes or tells us what kind of dog it is. It is a friendly dog, and friendly, which is the adjective, ends in ly. All right, so that is basically the end of our lesson on adjectives and adverbs. We were able to choose between both adjective and ly, adjectives and adverbs, as well as we were able to identify if the word is an adjective or an adverb. So, grade 8, thank you very much for joining our class or joining the lesson. I really hope that you will have an amazing evening further. Goodbye.